Hey everyone, it's Dan. I'm coming to you today from another hotel room, this time in Chicago, Illinois. It's a hotel room. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to review this book called Empire of the Summer Moon. And it's about the Comanches and their fighting in the central part of the United States around the time of the Civil War and a little bit afterwards. This book was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and that doesn't surprise me. It's very well written, and mostly for me, it's a look at a part of history I don't know a whole heck of a lot about. I've read a couple of books about Native Americans, but not enough that I think that I'm any sort of expert or anything. But what I like about this book is that it's counter-narrative. There's a dialogue or a narrative today that basically says that all Native Americans were peace-loving, lived in the Garden of Eden, and I think that it's all derived from the 1970s Don't Pollute advertisements that featured a Native American crying because people were dumping trash all over the United States. But regardless, what this book does is it gives a more balanced look at what was going on, at least towards the end of what think people call it Indian Wars. And honestly, I'm not agreeing with the conflict at the time, but this Quanah Parker, my God, he was a violent guy. So I think the larger picture for me is that this book reminds me that there's two sides of that conflict, and both people did horrific things. This particular person, horrific things. I don't even know if I'd let my kids read this book. I mean, that's how horrific it is. I think you probably have to be at least in your 20s because it's just, the violence is incredible. But so there's two sides to conflict, and both sides did horrible, horrible things to each other. Remember, I just read the book on Grant, and some of his cabinet wanted to kill all American Indians. How horrific is that? And so what I like about this book is that it reminds me, I think there's this tendency in people to take a very complicated subject and narrow it down into something that's simplistic, so it's easy to deal with. And this reminds us that life is not as simple as we sometimes would like it to be. And I think what happens is that same tendency to want to simplify things probably exacerbated the problems that most Native Americans experienced, because you would get reports of what this guy was doing, the Comanches were doing, and some other people, how horrific that was. And then the response would be a broad brush painting of all Native Americans and saying, well, they're all like this. And then that led to essentially war crimes against essentially peaceful people too. So anyway, so it's a violent book. It reminds us and warns us not to use broad brushes, I think. That's what I got out of it, to assign blame to whole groups of people for what a small group or individuals have done. And can you tell I'm having a hard time talking about this book? This is a tough book. It doesn't matter what group you belong to. You can use that group as an excuse to do horrific things, and we ought to be better than that as human beings. But it's a good book. I do recommend reading it. It's an eye-opener on a particular nasty part of American history. But I do warn you that if you read this book, it's super, super violent. And if you don't like that stuff, if you can't deal with it emotionally, you probably don't want to read this book. You probably don't want to give it to your 12-year-old kid and say, hey, learn about Native Americans. So I would suggest a more mature audience for this book. Again, probably in your 20s, in college, where you have a little bit more ability to look at things in a more forgiving light and try to understand it within a greater context. And then I think it gives you a lot to think about. So, this is a part of American history that very often is ignored and simplified, again, in cowboy movies. And it's much more complicated than that. And I think Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynne does a really good job of expanding the dialogue. So Empire of the Summer Moon, Quanah Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches, the most powerful Indian tribe in American history by S.C. Gwynne. Good, make you think about life book. Violent as all get out, but I do recommend it for mature audiences. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for stopping by today. Don't forget to share and like my video. And if you have, tasteful comments and well thought out comments about this particular subject and maybe this book, tell me what you think. I would like to hear some other thoughts about this book, particularly because I don't have a lot of experience reading this type of history on that aspect of American history. So it's a learning experience for me. But anyway, with that said, it's good to see you all again. I will see you next time.